If you keep accepting the timeline of human civilization without questioning it, you are actively working against your own understanding of what humans actually are. Here is why that matters. Everything you were taught, in school, in documentaries, in textbooks, rests on a single assumption that organized, complex societies only became possible after farming. Agriculture first, settlements second, monuments third. That was the rule, an ironclad rule taught in every university on Earth. Then, in 1994, a Kurdish shepherd in southeastern Turkey stumbled across something that shattered that rule completely. Not a small artifact, not a burial site, a temple, a massive, precisely engineered stone temple carved with intricate animal reliefs, arranged in perfect circles, built by people who had no crops, no permanent homes, and, according to every historian alive at the time, absolutely no business building something like this. The site is called Göbekli Tepe. It is 11,600 years old. That is 7,000 years older than Stonehenge, and it rewrites everything. Let's go back to what we all accepted as fact. The story of civilization, the one told in every history class, goes like this. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans were nomadic. They chased animals, they picked berries, they slept in caves and under trees. Then, around 10,000 BC in the Fertile Crescent, something clicked. Humans figured out farming. They planted grain. They stayed in one place. Permanent settlements grew. Surplus food created leisure time. Leisure time created specialization. Priests, builders, artists. And only then, after all of that, did complex religious structures and organized monuments become possible. This is called the Neolithic Revolution, and it is the foundation of everything we call civilization. Gordon Childe, one of the most influential archaeologists of the 20th century, codified this model in the 1930s, and it stuck for decades. The logic was airtight. You cannot build a massive temple if you are spending every waking hour hunting for food. You simply do not have the labor, the time, or the social organization to do it. That was the consensus. That was the wall. And for 60 years, nobody seriously challenged it. When archaeologists first encountered anomalies, sites that did not fit the neat farming first timeline, they did what academics always do. They found a way to fit the evidence into the existing model. A carved stone too old for the timeline? Probably misdated. A circular arrangement of rocks that looked intentional? Natural geological formation? A burial site with unexpected complexity? A one-off exception, not a rule. This is not incompetence. This is human nature. We build frameworks to understand the world, and then we protect those frameworks. Thomas Kuhn wrote an entire book about this in 1962, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, explaining how paradigm shifts are always resisted, always delayed, and always eventually forced by evidence that simply cannot be explained away. And for decades, that is exactly what happened with pre-agricultural complexity. Evidence was minimized, reframed, or quietly shelved. Researchers who pushed back too hard found their funding questioned and their credibility attacked. The system was not built to be wrong about something this fundamental. The farming first model fails for one devastating reason. Göbekli Tepe was built by people who were definitively, provably hunter-gatherers. German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, who led excavations at the site from 1996 until his death in 2014, spent nearly 2 decades proving this. No grain storage pits, no permanent housing foundations, no evidence of domesticated animals anywhere near the construction layers. What Schmidt found instead was this: hundreds of T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing up to 20 tons, carved with extraordinarily detailed reliefs of foxes, scorpions, vultures, and wild boars. The carvings are not crude. They are sophisticated. The largest pillars stand nearly 18 feet tall and were quarried from limestone bedrock roughly 100 meters away, without metal tools, without wheels, without any technology the conventional model says should have existed. And here is the detail that stops every expert cold. The site appears to have been deliberately buried. Around 8,000 BC, the builders, or someone, filled the entire complex with dirt and debris as if intentionally hiding it. Nobody does that by accident. Nobody does that without purpose. And nobody does that without a level of social coordination that the farming first model said was impossible for these people. Here is where the story gets genuinely strange. And I want you to stay with me here, because this next part changes the entire question. Most researchers assumed that farming caused civilization, that agriculture created the conditions for complex society. Schmidt flipped this completely. After nearly a decade at Göbekli Tepe, he proposed something radical. Religion built civilization, not farming. The theory goes like this. Hunter-gatherers, possibly from a wide geographic radius, gathered at this specific hilltop for ritual purposes. The act of gathering, of maintaining and expanding the sacred site, created a logistical problem. You cannot feed hundreds of people doing construction work in the middle of nowhere on hunting alone. So they began cultivating grain nearby, not because they figured out farming and then built, but because the temple demanded it. The monument came first. The agriculture followed. A 2017 genetic study published in Nature Plants appeared to support this. Researchers tracing the genetic origin of domesticated einkorn wheat found it traced back to the Karakadag Mountains. Göbekli Tepe sits at the base of those mountains. The oldest temple on Earth sits precisely where grain was first domesticated. That is not a coincidence that any serious researcher dismisses. So what does the world look like now that Göbekli Tepe exists? It looks like this. The timeline of human cognitive complexity has been pushed back dramatically. The capacity for abstract religious thought, large-scale social organization, and monumental architecture was present in humans 11,600 years ago, possibly much earlier, since Göbekli Tepe is almost certainly not the first attempt at something like this, but simply the one that survived. Stanford archaeologist Ian Hodder, who spent decades at the Neolithic site of Catalhoyuk, described Göbekli Tepe as evidence that symbolic and ritual life was not a byproduct of civilization, but its engine. And the implications do not stop at archaeology. If hunter-gatherers could conceive of, coordinate, and execute a multi-decade construction project of this scale, before farming, before writing, before any of the things we associate with advanced society, then what does that tell you about human intelligence? It tells you that the ceiling for human cognitive and social capability was reached far earlier than we thought. We were not primitive people slowly getting smarter. We were fully modern minds operating in radically different conditions. That distinction matters enormously. 3 things actually changed in how serious researchers now approach prehistoric humanity. First, the threshold for dismissing pre-agricultural complexity has been raised permanently. You cannot call a site an anomaly when it is the size of a small city and took generations to build. Second, the search radius for similar sites has expanded. Since Göbekli Tepe's announcement, at least a dozen other potentially significant pre-agricultural sites have been identified across the region using ground-penetrating radar and satellite imaging. Karahan Tepe, just 35 kilometers away, began serious excavation in 2019 and has already revealed structures potentially older than Göbekli Tepe itself. Third, and this is the one that quietly unsettles most people in the field, the question of what else is out there, underwater, under permafrost, under centuries of sediment, has become impossible to ignore. The last ice age ended approximately 11,700 years ago. Sea levels rose dramatically, submerging coastal areas where early humans almost certainly lived. We have explored less than 20% of the ocean floor. The honest answer is, we do not know what we have not found yet, and that is both the most exciting and most uncomfortable position for a field that spent a century being very certain about its timeline. Now, if you want to go deeper on exactly why human brains were capable of all of this, the cognitive architecture that made Göbekli Tepe possible, I want to recommend something I genuinely think you will find fascinating. The Creative Explosion on Audible explores the prehistoric leap in human cognition. The moment our ancestors developed symbolic thinking, language, and the capacity for abstract belief. It reads like a thriller, but it is rigorous science. If this video sparks something for you, that book will feed it. You can find it through the link in the description, and your first Audible title is free with a new membership. Here is what you can actually take from Göbekli Tepe beyond the historical facts. Every model you use to understand the world has a Göbekli Tepe hidden in it. A piece of evidence that does not fit, that gets minimized, that challenges something too fundamental to challenge comfortably. The researchers who found the temple did not go looking to overturn archaeology. Klaus Schmidt went to a previously dismissed site because a single carved stone in a museum had been mislabeled as medieval. He followed the detail that did not fit. That is the method. When you encounter information that contradicts a framework you have held as fact, about history, about human capability, about the limits of what is possible, the instinct is to dismiss it. Find an explanation that preserves the model. But the Göbekli Tepe lesson is this. Sometimes the anomaly is not wrong. Sometimes the model is. Ask yourself what assumptions you are carrying that have never been seriously tested. What timeline are you accepting because it was handed to you complete? What version of the story have you inherited that predates the evidence that would change it? The hunter-gatherers who built that temple 11,600 years ago were not waiting for permission to do something extraordinary. They built it anyway, with 20-ton stones, without metal, without wheels, without anyone telling them it was possible, because apparently nobody had told them yet that it was not. If this changed how you think about the ancient world, even slightly, share it with one person who thinks history is settled. It is not even close. Subscribe to History Uncovered for new episodes every week where we dig into exactly this kind of story, the evidence that breaks the model, the discoveries that got buried, and the questions mainstream history has not caught up to yet. Drop in the comments. What other civilization or ancient site do you think deserves this kind of scrutiny? I read every comment in the first 24 hours, and the best suggestions become future episodes. Disclaimer. This video is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing constitutes professional advice of any kind.